France is a country of paradoxes. On the one hand, we're known for our strong feminist figures like Simone de Beauvoir and Simone Weil.
On the other hand, France still has a long way to go till women have real equality in the workplace and in politics.
And then there's the fallout of the MeToo movement, which has been very divisive in a country where the old-fashioned concept of male gallantry is still very present.
Join us for this edition of French Connections Plus, where we look at women's rights in France. In theory, égalité, equality, is guaranteed under the French Constitution. All citizens are equal before the law, but in practice, gender inequality is everywhere.
And this despite the fact that when you look at statistics, young French women have a lot going for them. They do comparatively better in school, and they get more diplomas.
But things get a bit tougher when they get into the workforce. Gender inequality is strong. In fact, the word sexism was only entered into the French Labor Code in 2015.
In France, like in many other countries, there is a tenacious but narrowing gender pay gap. For the same job with similar qualifications and education, French women are paid on average 15% less than French men.
Now, to be fair, that is slightly better than the European Union average and much better than in the United States, where women on average earn 25% less than their male counterparts.
On top of the gender pay gap, there is a glass ceiling when it comes to top executive positions in companies, though cracks are starting to appear. In 2011, lawmakers said that major French companies have to have at least 40% of women on their boards, though as of yet, many companies don't meet that target.
Regardless, that's one of many laws that have been put in place here in France over the past decades to promote women's rights.
Like elsewhere in the world, the plight of French women radically changed during the 20th century. In 1944, they finally obtained the right to vote, 24 years after women in America and 51 years after the first women voted in New Zealand. More progress came in 1965, when married women obtained the right to work and open a bank account without the permission of their husbands. In 1967, the legalization of the contraceptive pill announced a seismic change. The French women's liberation movement was born in the wake of the May 1968 uprising, with the mission of fighting the patriarchy and legalizing abortion, which did become legal in 1975, thanks to a law championed by Simone Weil. In the year 2000, a law was voted to tackle sexism in politics, since all political parties must include equal numbers of men and women on electoral lists, and parties that don't are fined. Finally, in 2013, the government overturned an over 200-year-old ban on Parisian women wearing trousers. Better late than never.
Like elsewhere around the world, the MeToo movement got a lot of attention here in France.
Tens of thousands of women flooded social media with personal accounts of rape and harassment. They used the hashtag MeToo, but also the more explicit hashtag Balance ton porc, which means to squeal on your pig.
But MeToo also had a sort of French resistance, if you like, that got a lot of media attention.
In January 2018, 100 high-profile women published an open letter in the French daily Le Monde in defense of une liberté d'importuner, the freedom to pester, which they say is just part of the game of love.
The women who signed this letter, including French cinema icon Catherine Deneuve, called MeToo a Puritan, patronizing witch hunt fueled by a hatred of men and that treated women like children.
And abroad, people were quick to point out that this was just cultural. Of course there would be this kind of reaction in France, where flirting is a national pastime.
But it's much more complicated than that. Flo, you went to find out more from France 24's Annette Young.
To find out more about the impact of the MeToo movement here in France, I'm joined by Annette Young, who's the host of The 51% on France 24, which focuses on women and women reshaping the world. And we're here in a very symbolic place. It's the Simone de Beauvoir Audiovisual Center, which is focused on producing and collecting documentaries about women's rights. Now, Annette, here in France, like elsewhere, the MeToo movement went viral. But according to recent polls, French people feel like it didn't actually change anything? Why was the impact so different here in France?
I think it says a lot about the French culture and the way in which men and women and the relationship between men and women is viewed, primarily because there's the culture here, which you've spoken about before, of seduction, of gallantry, of, being flirtatious. And as a result, the notion of inappropriate behaviour hasn't really been front and centre, if you like, of people's minds, particularly in the workplace and in other parts of society. And I think for French society in general, it's been a hard one to wrap their heads around.
Because we haven't seen as many heads roll here in France as, say, in the United States. Where does that French resistance come from?
I think it comes back to what I was just saying about the pride that French people have in their cultural traditions. And as a result, there is a sense among certain quarters of society that we're all grown-ups here, we all realise that sexuality is an integral part of life, and let's just accept it for what it is. I would argue, however, that they're in a shrinking minority, that there is also a generational shift between older women and younger women. There's a very different view of sexism. I call it a dividing line, if you like, between people aged 35 and above and 35 and under. And if you're 35 and under, that you're more likely to speak English, you're more likely to have lived or studied abroad. You've been exposed to other cultures as such beyond the hexagon. And therefore you're more open to the idea of equality, perhaps in the Anglo-Saxon way that we see it.
Do you think that this drive for more equality between men and women, does that compromise freedom, perhaps sexual freedom?
I would argue no, but that's probably because I'm Australian and living here, it's something that I believe very strongly that this country has a long way to go in terms of reaching equality and parity. Attitudes are starting to change. We are witnessing not only a digital revolution, but a gender revolution. There are more women than ever in the workforce. There are more women than ever at university. There are more women than ever who have independent financial means. And what does that mean at the end of the day? It means they have power. And we're starting to see that. Women are finding their voice and therefore they have the ability to change things. And as far as we see it on the 51%, that indeed is a good thing.
Well, it certainly is a good thing, and thank you so much, Annette. And if you haven't yet, do check out the 51%. It's a great show. Annette mentioned that women are finding a voice to call out inappropriate behavior, because if you ask French women, harassment happens on a daily basis to a varying degree.
A few years ago, a study came out saying 20% of French women had been harassed at least once in the workplace.
And for those who speak out, nearly all of them lose their jobs. So as you can imagine, most don't.
And it happens in public as well. A survey by the company that runs the Paris Metro found that 100% of female passengers had experienced harassment at least once.
It's definitely happened to me.
It's happened to me too.
In a bid to crack down on street harassment, the government passed a law making catcalling and lewd comments a crime.
A crime punishable by on-the-spot fines of a minimum of 90 euros, though critics say it's often hard to catch the people red-handed.
In any event, though, it's indicative of a deeper social change that's underway, with more and more women saying, enough is enough. On top of calling out harassment in the streets and in the workplace, many French women are challenging gendered social roles, which remain strong in France. For instance, when it comes to domestic chores or raising children, French women carry the weight, often on top of a full-time job.
There's actually an expression in French for this. It's called la charge mentale, the mental load. Recently, the concept went viral on social media after a French feminist named Emma made a comic book about it. But what exactly is this mental load?
Vous connaissez le concept de la charge mentale au sein d'un couple? Est-ce que vous en avez entendu parler?
Non.
C'est, je dirais, le fait de penser à absolument tout ce qu'on a à faire en permanence.
Le ménage, s'occuper des enfants, aller les chercher, les emmener au sport, etc. Et l'homme ne se sent pas forcément impliqué.
Pour moi, c'est le travail que la femme doit faire en plus de son activité professionnelle lorsque le soir elle rentre, donc sa double journée en fait.
Est-ce que vous vous sentez concerné par la charge mentale?
Beaucoup. 100% du temps, oui.
Oui, je m'aperçois qu'effectivement, le ménage, je me sens plus concernée que mon compagnon. Oui.
que les choses changent. Oui, bah oui.
De notre époque, le mari n'aidait pas du tout.
Moi, j'assume, je fais le ménage, je fais la bouffe aussi, voilà.
Quelle est pour vous la solution pour essayer d'équilibrer un peu plus ces choses?
La communication.
Il faut de la confiance, il faut de la discussion, il faut de la coopération.
Ça commence très tôt, hein, chez les enfants, leur apprendre à chacun gérer les choses. Pour les femmes, apprendre à déléguer, à pas tout faire et à laisser faire les autres.
Le chemin est encore un peu long, je pense, parce qu'il faut que les mentalités changent. Mais de toute façon, elles finiront par changer par la force des choses.
Mais battez-vous pour ça, battez-vous.
Many of you sent in your questions about women's rights in France, like Jen. She says, I'm curious to know about the laws surrounding legal consent in France.
Well, it might be surprising to people abroad, but in France there is no legal age of sexual consent. Now, the government had wanted to fix it at 15 years old, but backed down. And here's where it gets tricky, because in France it's illegal for an adult to have sex with someone under the age of 15, but lawmakers admit the possibility that a minor is capable of consenting to having sex. And that means that cases that could be considered as statutory rape in other countries can be sentenced as assault here in France, which carries a lesser sentence.
I have a question for you, much lighter tone. Mademoiselle, everyone knows the word refers to a young single woman. Madame, of course, is for an older married woman. How come in France we don't have a word that encompasses all women regardless of their marital status, like Ms?
It would be so convenient if we had a word like Ms. in France, but for now, it doesn't exist. That being said, though, the word mademoiselle has been removed from all official administration because it was deemed sexist. But mademoiselle is still used in practice, though it's a little old-fashioned, and it can be so confusing when you don't know the age of the woman you're talking to.
And it is definitely a marker of age. I remember how shocked I was the first time somebody called me madame.
And people are starting to call me madame, and it's really upsetting. But when in doubt, use madame.
No, when in doubt, use mademoiselle.
All right, mademoiselle. That's all the time we have for today, but please keep sending me your questions. You can tweet me at Flo Villeneuve, or you can reach out to us on Facebook.
And we'll see you soon for the next French Connections Plus. On y va, madame.